It was the daytime, but it felt dark.
There's so much stuff going through my mind, but the main thing is hoping that I do make it out.
It looked like a monster, like we were about to go into the belly of a beast.
Once you're there, it's easy to get there, but it's hard as hell to get out.
It's gladiator school for real.
Complete upside down kingdom. Everything that means something to us here doesn't mean there.
It was total chaos. It was violence.
I was scared.
I was literally cowering in the corner.
The worse you do, the bigger you are.
I've seen men rape other men.
If you get there and you don't have a weapon to defend yourself, you have an issue.
I was screaming, help me, they're raping me.
I was literally hogtied.
It's just kicking me.
It broke my nose.
It's spitting on me.
It broke a bone in my back.
It's madness.
That's just a little window into the ordeal faced by thousands of detainees that have spent time in New York City's most notorious jail, Rikers Island. Today on the stream, the US's second largest jail holds around 8,000 people. 89% are black or Latino, and nearly 80% are awaiting trial and are too poor to get out on bail. Now, over the decades, the island has become a symbol of brutality.
It is a place that is an affront to humanity and decency, and is a stain on our city's reputation.
New York City has long resisted calls to shutter Rikers Island, but Mayor Bill de Blasio recently announced a plan to close it down.
Rikers Island is an example and an expression of a major national problem. The mass incarceration crisis did not begin in New York City, but it will end here. We are going to end the era of mass incarceration by making this important change.
But activists say the jail is a human rights atrocity and needs to be shut down sooner. So here to help us discuss how it might be possible to close Rikers Island. In New York, Glenn E. Martin is president and founder of Just Leadership USA. He's also the founder of the hashtag campaign Close Rikers and has been detained twice on Rikers Island. In San Francisco, Raphael Sperry is president of Architects, Designers, and Planners for Social Responsibility.
Anna McDuane is Associate Professor of English at the University of Connecticut and also the editor of Child Slavery Before and After Emancipation. And also in New York, Stanley Richards is a member of the New York City Board of Correction. He's also a former inmate on Rikers Island. Hello, everybody. Good to have you here. Let me just show our audience this. Smaller, safer, fairer, a roadmap to closing Rikers Island. Let me just scoot down here so our audience can see what we're looking at. Stanley, when you see this, what goes through your mind when you look at this?
I see, you know, what Judge Lippman described as a place of hopelessness and despair. But then as I stare into it and I look at the mayor's plan for a safer, fairer, and smaller criminal justice system, I begin to see hope. And I begin to see what we could do as a city to really transform and change, fundamentally change our criminal justice system. You know, the mayor named me as one of the co-chairs on the implementation task force. So our job is to make sure that we do everything within our power to implement the policies and strategies that both the mayor laid out and the Independent Commission on Criminal Justice Reform that Judge Lippman laid out is a roadmap to close Rikers Island. We're going to close Rikers, we're going to end mass incarceration, and we're going to create a much smaller footprint in terms of criminal justice, a system that is fairer, gives people an opportunity to have their cases heard and to have most of those cases heard safely in the community, and then to create a fairer system in terms of making sure that people are held accountable but are processed swiftly.
So Stanley and Glenn, you come to our conversation with unique qualifications. You've both been inside Rikers as inmates. Glenn, how bad can a prison be that people are suggesting it has to close? How bad can it be?
You know, Rikers Island is referred to as Gladiator School. It was referred to as Gladiator School 30 years ago when I was there and was stabbed 4 times while I was only there for 48 hours. And it's referred to as Gladiator School today. You really have 2 choices, predator or prey. And with all due respect to my colleague Stanley, I actually disagree about the mayor's positioning on closing Rikers. I think our mayor is an incrementalist. I think that his plan for closing Rikers and the 10-year timeline doesn't in any way match the scope of the problem. I think that him calling the Lippman report, which I hope we talk a little bit more about, a group of volunteers that got together and made recommendations, and then he himself puts out a series of recommendations with no community input after this multi-million-dollar philanthropic investment and investment of time by multiple experts from around the country. I just think that it points to the fact that the mayor is not yet fully committed to closing Rikers. But the Close Rikers campaign invests in the leadership of people who've been most harmed by Rikers. And the mayor may be a powerful man here in New York City, but he can't continue to hold himself out as a national progressive leader with a torture island in his own backyard.
So Glenn, I hear you there, but I want to just jump in very quickly here, because I hear Glenn there, but I also hear him use the term torture island. And for our international community, I don't think they understand quite yet why it has that nickname. Here is a tweet we got from Kathy. She says, until we address the abuse, the culture of violence and brutality that exists on Rikers, we'll only end up with 5 mini Rikers all the same if we close it down. She goes on to say that in her view, part of the problem and the obstacle is the Correctional Officers Union. Nothing gets done unless they are on board, nothing. So Stanley, I know you wanted to jump in there, and you also have unique insight on this. I'd like to hear your thoughts on, one, Torture Island, why it has that name, and two, if you think part of the problem is the officers inside.
So, and I want to respond to Glenn's comments. So, you know, Torture Island is because Rikers Island is a place of hurt, pure hurt, right? It hurts those that are detained there. It hurts those that have to work there. It hurts those that have to come visit. It's about hurt all around when you think about Rikers Island. So that's why it's called Torture Island, because there's nothing that's good that comes out of that place by detaining right now 9,400 people in our New York City criminal justice system, those incarcerated on Rikers and in the borough facilities. So the Torture Island is because it is a culture of violence. It is a culture of predator or prey. It is a culture of the survival of the fittest. So that's one of the reasons we call it Torture Island. And the person who sent that tweet is absolutely right. What we're talking about doing in this Close the Rikers, both in the Lippman Commission and in the mayor's plan, is to create training for the officers so that the officers are able to engage and interact with people who are being detained. We talked about creating a training facility for them so that we can fundamentally change the culture in which the correction officers operate in, and to give the correction officers the tools necessary to manage without violence. They can manage through listening, manage through engagement, manage through treating people like you would want to be treated if you was in that situation. So that viewer was absolutely right. If we don't change the culture, we're gonna have 5 smaller Rikers Island, and that's not what we want to do. The other thing I want to say, and this is to Glenn's point, I would agree.
Stanley, let a few other people into the conversation. I love listening to you, but I want to hear the rest as well. Raphael, what were you trying to say? Go ahead.
I was going to say that, yeah, your guest is right, that there's very much the risk that if we replace Rikers Island with smaller jails that hold half as many people, all of them are going to be run the same way that they were run before. And that what we need to be doing is building different kinds of things rather than different jails. We need to be building reentry centers for people who are coming out of prison. We need to be building community courts. We need to be building mental health centers. We need to be building drop-in centers so that when people have crises in their neighborhood, those don't become crimes, but that people can get a response before they get into the criminal justice system.
So I should say that one of the suggestions for being able to close Rikers is to set up smaller community facilities rather than have this huge, large one on an island. Let me show you something that Anna May actually wrote. Anna May, every time we talk about how despicable this place is, you're nodding your head. There's history to this. The Shame of Rikers, the odious 19th century history of Rikers Island provides just one more good reason to shut it down. Connect the dots, the past and the present.
Right, I mean, when we talk about it being Torture Island and that lasting for the past 30 years, my research, you know, I was sort of shocked. I was writing a book about 19th century New York City and a culture of slavery. And what I was struck by is how long the Rikers name and Rikers Island has been a place of a culture of violence, a culture of predator and prey. I talked about this one story of someone who was a fugitive slave in 1829. Basically they called it the Kidnappers Club, and they would steal Black people from schools, from the streets, from their homes, and bring them to before the court system. And a man named Richard Riker, who, it's not a coincidence, right? He is an ancestor. It was his family that owned Rikers Island. Would basically, he was known to be part of this kidnapping club, and he would take bribes and sell people down south. When the Civil War came, Rikers Island was a place in which they would recruit and train soldiers. And once Black people in New York City fought very hard for the right to fight for their country, even though their country was not supporting them the way that it should be. And what happened as soon as the law went through, again, we had the same issue of often young Black men being stolen off the streets for recruitment bonuses. And so again, you had sort of the system in which the court system sort of were making profit from sort of taking people's freedom and holding them on Rikers Island in the name of Rikers. And then by the 1930s, when it opens as a prison, 6 years after the prison was opened, it was declared, unfit for living, because it's kind of hard to believe, but they added to the island to make more room for more prisoners by putting garbage, sort of adding garbage to the island, and they would have wild dogs to handle the rats. They actually talk about like actual flames sort of erupting from the soil because of the gases that were underneath. It was a literal hellhole. And it's been for hundreds of years, right? And so that's where I think sort of these issues of the system, when we talk about how big the system is and how much of a challenge it is to really, I agree completely. I think we need to do something radically different, but I also think we need to come to grips with how long this sort of culture has been in place.
And I think people online are doing just that. We got this tweet. This is Yvette D. Clark, and she's a New York representative, and she links to your piece. She says, the racist legacy of Rikers Island continues into the president. Thank you, Mayor, for deciding to close it down. So that's one person saying, okay, the mayor is doing a good thing. I want to pass over to this tweet. This is a comment we got actually from Roy Caldwood. He's a retired assistant deputy warden, and he was at Rikers in the 60s and 70s as warden. And he says, 10 years, though, lacks a sense of urgency, and it reflects a level of tolerance and acceptance of this horrific state. And he's not the only person who said that. We also got a comment from Robert Ganji. He's a mayoral candidate in New York, and so he, of course, has his own perspective, and this is what he said.
The city could take steps to close Rikers in a year. It's important to remember from a general standpoint that the vast majority of inmates on Rikers Island are not considered dangerous or predatory by any agent of the criminal justice system, from police to district attorneys. And very specifically, the city could take a step to end broken windows policing, which targets mainly Black and brown New Yorkers for low-level infractions. By doing so, the city would significantly reduce the population on Rikers Island.
So, Glenn, do you want to pick up on that? 10 years, way too long?
Sure. Look, I was part of the Lippman Commission, and I know that 10-year timeline was a political timeline. We started with 20 years, we went down to 15 years, and then we landed at 10 years. And the truth is that if the mayor wanted to invest his political capital, we could do it a lot sooner. The Empire State Building was built in a year and 45 days. So this is really about the mayor's investment of his capital to make this happen. We spend $247,000 per bed per year on this torture island. And the fact of the matter is, when people say to me we should rebuild on Rikers, what they don't realize is that literally the architecture of the island, because it's 200 feet away from LaGuardia Airport, doesn't allow for the safe construction of jails. Jails are meant to be modular so that officers and detainees are safe. These jails are flat and they're linear, and they're very unsafe for everyone involved. Also, people who argue that we're going to end up with 5 small Rikers Island probably don't realize we already have other small jails in New York City. And because they don't have the insidious history that was just described by Anna Mae, they do not have the same level of violence as Rikers Island itself. And lastly, people compare what happens at Rikers Island to slavery in this country. And I would argue that when you have a system that is so oppressive that you're comparing it to slavery, that we don't have time to sit around and ask, how can we create something perfect and let perfect be the enemy of the good?
Stanley?
And I would agree. I don't think there's any disagreement on that we should do it as fast as possible. For me, as a formerly incarcerated person who spent many, many years on Rikers Island and in the prison system, who thought my life would always be about cycling in and out of the prison, the time is of the essence for me. This is an urgent issue. I think both what we put forth in the Lippman report and what the mayor's putting forth is a framework for us to operate. We are going to be taking this on. We had our first co-chair meeting and we said, listen, we are going to be a task force that's not about putting out a report, not about just giving updates, but about getting results and getting to action. We are going to get to action. We're going to move as swiftly as we can to implement the strategies that I might say the strategies that the mayor is using were in the Lippman report. So it really mirrors the Lippman report. So we're going to be implementing those strategies as swiftly as we can. There is no disagreement that we should close Rikers Island.
How swiftly is swiftly, Stanley? How swiftly?
Listen, as the co-chairs of this implementation task force, we had our first meeting this week.
Oh, you're a very skilled debater. How swiftly is swiftly?
I tell you, swiftly. We're going to be
a long
moving
time even for building a jail.
We're going to be moving as quickly as possible. We're going to be moving simultaneously.
You're avoiding it. I appreciate why you're doing that. Raphael, what were we going to add? Go ahead.
10 years is a long time to build buildings, and architecture these days can be relatively slow. But part of the focus of the Lippman Commission report, which I think was a mistake, is it said that there should be $11 billion allocated to building new smaller jails that would work better. It didn't allocate any capital funds for any of the other facilities. It kind of gave a lot of lip service to things that might be better for community members, like mental health centers and drop-in centers and reentry housing. But if you really want to solve this problem, you need to build those other facilities faster, and you need to build them first, and you need to provide money for them. And the good news is that all of that stuff is much easier to build than prisons, which take up a longer planning timeline, or more complicated and expensive construction. So I appreciate the critique that came out of the Lippman report, but I agree with Glenn that things could go a lot faster and that we could aim higher.
So Raphael, we got a tweet. I want to direct this to Raphael because we got this tweet from Sarah, and she says other countries see more success in rehabilitation over imprisonment, and yet the U.S. continues to lag behind because prisons are for profit. And I know all of our guests could address that, and it's something that we've touched on here at the stream with the private prison industry, et cetera. But Raphael, I know that you're working on a project that would transform the criminal justice system, specifically when it comes to prison. So how will that answer here Sarah's tweet?
Well, what I would say is when you try and accomplish rehabilitation inside of a prison, which is primarily like where containment and control of people is the #1 goal, and where punishment is part of the plan, there's an inherent conflict. And what you see is that rehabilitation always loses out, especially over time, the longer it goes. And I think when we look at the legacy, like Anna May shared, so you need to build something that's not a prison and that's not staffed by prison guards.
Raphael, you sent us some pictures so that we could kind of visualize what you're talking about. So we're going to show these pictures. Syracuse, New York, I believe. As we show them, can you tell us what's going on there? Because this is a reimagining of what prison can be like.
Well, this is a visualization of a peacemaking center. So it's a reimagining of what the communities where people who are in prison today could be and what they could be doing. Instead of being in a gladiator school, they could actually be in a real school like this, where they're learning nonviolent conflict resolution. This is one of my colleagues, Deanna Van Buren, working with women in a prison to do design projects, not for a nicer jail, but for the kind of housing they needed beforehand, like this kind of place, in order to keep themselves out of trouble and in order to heal their community from the kind of harms that Rikers Island has, where people have gone, but it has never helped.
And I agree with Raphael. I mean, at the Fortune Society, we see close to 7,000 people who are trying to rebuild their lives. We stand ready. Fortune Society, Osborne, Cases, there's a number of community-based organizations that are standing ready to support this effort. For the real work in terms of reducing the number of people in that's going through our criminal justice system starts with diversion and starts with not putting so many people in there. And as the mayor said, as we said in the Lippman report, we need to expand alternatives to incarceration, alternatives to detention, diversion. We need to expand those programs. And there are organizations like the organization I work for, Fortune Society, where we stand ready to partner with the mayor and any city agency that looks to increase the ability to divert so many young people and so many people who are ending up on Rikers Island.
Let me just play a little clip of New York's Mayor de Blasio, what he said in March, because I feel like he understood how difficult it is to close a facility like Rikers Island. This is March of this year. Have a listen to what he had to say.
Let's be clear what this is going to take. This begins with lowering the jail population overall. So this is how the pieces fit together. Job one is to reduce crime. Reducing crime means reducing jail population. Any talk of getting off Rikers is meaningless if we don't keep reducing crime.
Wow, this is the whole justice system going on here. Glenn.
Glenn, I actually was at the mayor's announcement. I was the only civilian that made it into City Hall that day because he decided to close City Hall and make it into a private announcement because he wanted to control the messaging. And what I saw him do was not show himself to be a mayor to understand the complexity of what it takes to close Rikers, but to show himself to be a skilled mayor in taking the responsibility for doing so and passing it along to the police department, to the city council,
Glenn,
and to everyone else.
Let me just pick you up on this then. Okay, he wants to lower the jail population overall. That seems reasonable. He wants to reduce crime. Seems reasonable. Are you saying that he's not being honest about what he says? Anna-May, help me out here. Go ahead.
I just wanted to jump in and add as well that, I mean, reducing crime is one of the aspects of this, but I think and sort of our talk about structures leads us to this, that Rikers is sort of the end result of so many other systems that are broken that I think we need to pay attention to. For instance, 70% of the women on Rikers Island are the primary caretakers of children who wind up in foster care system, which is underfunded. We haven't talked about the school to prison pipeline, in which we sort of have police in schools, and sort of the first sort of security move is not to sort of counsel children, but to sort of incarcerate them. So, I mean, I do think, and that's something, a question I'd have for Stanley is sort of like Rikers and reducing crime and moving up court dates is all very important, but it's also a sort of an opportunity for us to think about it, how it sits in the middle of all these other structures that feed into it. And then reducing crime is...
Absolutely.
This is a mayor who just last week, just 2 weeks ago when he was in Germany, said to the media that he wished that panhandling was illegal. That doesn't sound like a mayor to me who wants to reduce the amount of people that goes to Rikers. That sounds like a mayor who wants to double down on his broken windows policing policies that actually end up arresting people for poverty, homelessness, mental health, addiction, you name it.
So I want to jump in here on that because there's someone I think would agree with you, Glenn. This is Jacqueline. She says it seems less politically feasible to have a shutdown complete after completely different officials and a different mayor is in charge. Right. So Stanley, I will give that to you because, of course, there is an election coming up and we may have a different mayor in New York. What is the plan then to make sure that this stays on the consciousness of New Yorkers?
Well, let me just rewind the tape for a minute here, right? This was all really started from Melissa Monteviverito, who said, I want to put together a blue ribbon commission to really examine what it would take for us to close Rikers Island. So she went out there and she put this together, and through the work that Glenn and I were both part of, we came out with the blueprint that really lays out step by step with all stakeholders involved, the mayor, the city council, the state legislature, and the governor, what it would take for all of us and communities most impacted, what it would take for us to do this. So I think there is enough what came out of the Lippman Commission that now the mayor has taken up, and mayor has taken many of the recommendations that came out the Lippman Commission to including the numbers of what it would take to close Rikers to move forward. So I feel like there's enough.
I'm going to do this really quickly. I'm not even giving you any moments to speak. 2027, we're all going to be a lot older. Glenn, will there be a Rikers Island prison?
I absolutely believe that before 2027, there won't be a Rikers prison because communities most harmed are going to continue to demand it.
Raphael, what's your gut telling you?
No, they're going to close it. They'll turn it into a runway for LaGuardia Airport.
Ooh, Anna-May.
My hope is that they would close it and they would have a museum that would allow people to sort of understand the long history and the systems that have led to why we had to close it.
Stanley, 2027.
It will be closed, and we will be measuring that by incremental changes that we'll see over the next couple of years. And it will be exactly what the Lippman Commission report recommended, part for expansion of the airline, a way of creating economic opportunities for those most impacted. And,
thank you so much, yes. We'll take you online. There's still so much to talk about. aljazeera.com/thestream. See you there. Hello everybody, we're talking about closing the US's second largest jail complex, that's Rikers Island. So guess, if there was something that we left out of this, there's so many things that I'm thinking about we didn't share with our global audience. Even the concept of putting young people in jail waiting for their trial date. That is just seems to me so contrary to what justice is, and there are some very, very famous cases of that happening to young people and to people just waiting and then their cases being dismissed. But this happens not just in Rikers Island, this happens all over the US. I'm just thinking, Glenn, I know you're not a big fan of this closing Rikers Island plan per se, or maybe just the mayor, but could this be a template for what happens in the rest of the US?
So look, we launched this campaign a little bit over 16 months ago. And when we first said close Rikers, it was a really lonely place to be. And now, since we got the mayor to say yes, that has reverberated across the US. We're launching 6 more campaigns starting the 1st of January 2018 to work on closing other facilities around the country. People were inspired by what people who've been harmed by Rikers were able to achieve in such a short period of time. We haven't even talked about things like the cost, $247,000 per bed per year, or the fact that 80% of the people that are there are actually not even convicted of a crime. This is America. The Constitution shouldn't die at the bridge to Rikers Island, but unfortunately it does.
There's one of the issues that I wanted to bring up was the idea of there being corruption on Rikers Island. Again, not news if you know the sort of US prison system. This is Darcel Clark from the Bronx District. She's a Bronx District attorney, and in May of last year, she talked about a massive corruption scandal that revealed officers making thousands of dollars selling drugs and weapons to prisoners. Have a look at what she had to say.
This alleged scheme contributed to the climate of danger and fear that feeds the notorious reputation of Rikers Island for brutality, and it reveals the true scope of corruption with inmates, Department of Correction employees, and outsiders, all accused of selfishly endangering others.
Stanley, that's not just going to be unique to Rikers Island. That would happen. That could happen anywhere.
Absolutely. I mean, and in New York State, we've seen, you know, the escape at Dannemora, where a civilian helped someone who was working in the prison help a couple of people escape. So we know that the system, any large system, is going to have those issues, and we have oversight agencies and the district attorneys and the police that should be investigating those things. But I want to go back to like closing Rikers Island. What it will also take, and we haven't had a chance to really talk about this, is for the community to demand from our district attorneys a fair and equal system, right? The district attorney makes the decisions about who goes to jail and who gets released, who goes into a diversion program and who goes to Rikers Island. We need to be pressuring our district attorneys to say, hey, you're part of the problem. If you don't start making decisions about fair decisions about who goes in and who doesn't, then we're going to end up with this mass incarceration. And recently, we had Cy Vance publicly say that he was no longer going to be prosecuting low-level marijuana arrests. He wasn't going to do it. We need all of the DAs to be saying that. That's going to make a difference. When we looked at how many misdemeanor arrests came through the system, through the Lippman report, 103,000 arrests came through the system. That's unheard of.
There's so much to talk about, but there always is a lot when you talk about the US prison system. I'm just going to give the last word to our community and Malika. Guess we could go on for another hour, but I'm not going to. I'm going to resist it. I'm going to have some discipline here. Malika, what do you have?
Our community, but perhaps a new community member, because he's a New York City councilman who tweeted in when he saw we were doing this show. He says, New York City must close the nightmare that is Rikers Island once and for all. 10 years is too long, and that's Rory Landsman.
All right, guests, thank you for your predictions about what would happen to Rikers Island. Glenn and Raphael and Anna Mae and Stanley, really appreciate your time today and your insight as well. Take care, everybody.